The courtroom hummed with low whispers as Marcus Red stood alone at the defense table. His suit was neat, but clearly worn. Across from him, Brandon Locke, the bank's star attorney, lounged with smug ease, while Judge Ernest Crowell chuckled from the bench. "Representing yourself, Mr. Red," he said, tapping his gavel lightly. "This ought to be entertaining." Marcus didn't flinch. He met the judge's eyes and replied, calm and steady, "I'm not here for entertainment, Your Honor. I'm here to win." Could a man with no law degree really drag corruption into the light in open court? Before we dive into how Marcus got here, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. If you stand on the side of justice, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. 6 months earlier, 38-year-old Marcus Red stood on the cracked front porch of his late mother's house, the morning sun throwing long shadows over splintered steps. The small home, humble but packed with memories, had belonged to his family for 3 generations. It wasn't just real estate, it was history, the last solid piece of his mother's legacy. In his hand, he clutched an eviction notice stamped in harsh red letters. Final notice. Property must be vacated in 14 days. His throat tightened as he reread the words. His mother, Evelyn Red, had worked 2 jobs for years to keep the house. She died believing it was safe, paid off, forever theirs. How could this be happening now? Heart racing, Marcus rushed inside and went straight to the old metal file cabinet in the living room corner. He yanked open drawers, flipping through mortgage statements, tax receipts, the original deed. Everything looked in order. Then he spotted something he'd never seen, a second mortgage agreement bearing what was supposed to be his mother's signature. But the handwriting looked wrong, shakier, slanted at a strange angle, nothing like her usual neat script. His first move was to call the bank. He sat on hold nearly half an hour, his leg bouncing as cheesy music played. Finally, a flat, disinterested voice answered, "Foreclosure Department, Heritage, First Bank." Marcus gripped the phone harder. "I'm calling about an eviction notice for Evelyn Red's property," he said. "There's been a mistake. My mother paid off the mortgage. I have the deed." The woman on the line sighed, clearly bored. "Sir, the account is in default for non-payment on a second mortgage taken out 2 years ago." Marcus frowned. "That's impossible. My mother never took a second mortgage. I'm staring at some so-called agreement now." The rep's tone went icy. "Maybe you weren't aware of her financial situation." The insinuation hit like a slap. Marcus clenched his jaw. "I want copies of every document tied to this loan." "File a request with our legal department," she replied coolly, "but it won't stop the eviction." Then the line went dead. Still holding the phone, Marcus stared at a framed photo of his mom on the mantel, taken the day she'd finally burned the original mortgage papers, celebrating freedom from debt. His hands shook. Someone was lying, and they were using his mother's name to do it. Determined, Marcus drove straight to the bank. Inside, he was ushered to the office of branch manager Derek Kane, a middle-aged white man with a polished smile that didn't reach his eyes. Derek barely skimmed Marcus's documents before sliding them back with a smug shrug. "People like you need to understand this system wasn't built for you," he said. "If you're in default, you lose the house. That's the end of it." Marcus leaned forward, voice controlled but tight. "This signature on the second mortgage? It isn't my mother's. Look again." Derek's gaze flicked down, but his smirk never faded. Signatures change. People get desperate, make bad choices. Maybe she didn't tell you everything. She didn't take this loan, Marcus insisted. And you know it. Derek's tone hardened. If you want to contest it, hire an attorney. But you better move quick. You've got 2 weeks. Marcus left the bank seething. Hiring a lawyer wasn't realistic. After corporate downsizing killed his longtime social work job, he'd been scrubbing floors part-time at the local community center. Every paycheck disappeared into groceries, utilities, and keeping the lights on. There was no pile of money sitting around for legal fees. The system knew that. It counted on that. That night, Marcus sat at the scarred kitchen table, papers spread everywhere, the eviction notice glaring at him like a death sentence in red ink. He'd spent hours reading fine print until his eyes burned. His phone buzzed. His girlfriend, Jade. "How bad is it?" she texted. "Bad," he typed back. "But I'm not giving up." He couldn't. Not yet. The next morning, he went to the local legal aid office, clutching his folder like a shield. The receptionist barely skimmed his documents before shaking her head. "We're at capacity," she said. "You'll have to try private counsel." He did. Firm after firm brushed him off. Conflicts of interest, overloaded caseloads, or straight up, "We only take winnable cases." Each rejection tightened the knot in his chest. Frustrated, Marcus came home to find a stark white notice taped to his front door. Sheriff's eviction, scheduled for 10 days from today. His pulse hammered. He had less than 2 weeks to fight a machine built to crush people exactly like him. That evening, desperate, he went to a town hall meeting, hoping to catch Councilman Brett Harlan, a white politician who loved to talk about community outreach. After the meeting, Marcus finally cornered him. Harlan gave a practiced, sympathetic smile. "I'm truly sorry for your situation," he said, patting Marcus's shoulder like he was a child. "But the bank followed procedure. Best thing you can do is look for alternative housing." Marcus snapped. "This isn't just a roof over my head. It's my family's history." Harlan's smile dimmed. "History doesn't pay the mortgage, son." The word son hung there, heavy and patronizing. Marcus stepped back, chest tight. They'd already decided he didn't belong here. The eviction notice wasn't just about money. It was about power, about erasing him and people like him. He walked home feeling beaten, but not broken. Sitting on his mother's old bed, the weight of generations pressing down, one thought crystallized. If they think I'll leave quietly, they don't know me at all. The fight had only begun. Marcus spent that night back at the kitchen table, documents scattered across the worn wood. The eviction notice glared up, red ink screaming. He'd been cross-checking every page for hours, and the second mortgage still made no sense. The handwriting didn't match. The notary stamp looked off, ink uneven, like it had been copied or printed instead of stamped. His laptop hummed as he typed mortgage fraud cases into the search bar. Page after page of horror stories popped up. Families thrown out because of clerical errors, predatory loans, forged documents. One case grabbed him, Martin v. Horizon Bank, where a homeowner beat foreclosure by proving the mortgage transfer was invalid. The key? A formal demand for every scrap of documentation tied to the loan. Marcus scribbled notes, his mind racing. He needed help, but with every attorney's door slammed in his face, he knew this fight might be his alone. He glanced at the clock, 3:12 a.m. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. The next morning, he headed downtown to the courthouse, clutching his folder of evidence like a lifeline as he climbed the gleaming marble steps. Inside, he waited nearly an hour in line at the clerk's window. "I need to file a motion for a stay of eviction," Marcus said, sliding his forms forward. The clerk, a middle-aged white woman with sharp eyes, glanced over the paperwork. "Are you representing yourself?" she asked, skeptical. "Yes," he replied. She sighed. "You'd be better off with a lawyer. These don't usually end well for pro se defendants." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I don't have time or money for a lawyer. Just file the motion, please." Reluctantly, she stamped the forms and handed him a copy. "The judge will review it. Don't get your hopes up." By noon, Marcus was back home, exhaustion sinking deep into his bones. He sat on the porch, flipping through the papers again when his phone buzzed. Jade. "Any luck?" she asked, worry plain in her voice. "I filed for a stay," Marcus said. "Long shot. But it's something." She sighed on the other end. "You can't keep pushing like this. What if you lose? What if they come while you're working and toss everything in the street?" Marcus stared at the yard. "I can't think about that. This isn't just a house. It's about standing up to people who think they can steamroll us because we don't have money or connections." Jade was quiet a moment. "Just don't let this fight destroy you," she whispered. Marcus didn't respond. He couldn't, because he knew she was right. But surrender wasn't an option. 2 days later, the court's response arrived. Motion denied. Marcus stood in the courthouse hallway, letter trembling in his hand, dread sinking like a stone in his chest. He'd followed every rule, and the system still slammed the door in his face. "See, adiatsakench, akihons." Fueled by anger, he stormed back to the Heritage First Branch, where the second mortgage supposedly originated. Branch manager Derek Kane lounged behind his polished oak desk, sipping coffee like he hadn't casually helped erase Marcus's family legacy. "I want to see the original documents for that second mortgage," Marcus demanded, voice dangerously controlled. Derek leaned back, completely unfazed. "I told you already, Mr. Red. The foreclosure's final. You're wasting everyone's time." "Then prove it," Marcus shot back. "Show me the original paperwork." Derek's predatory smile widened. "File a discovery request. Until then, this conversation is over." Marcus's fist clenched, but he knew shouting wouldn't change a thing. He turned and walked out, humiliation burning. Outside, the sun beat down as he sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went pale, rage and fear warring inside him. Later that evening, cleaning empty hallways at the community center where he worked part-time, Marcus moved on autopilot, mop in hand, mind spinning. One of the volunteers, Mrs. Harmon, an elderly black woman who had lived through the civil rights era, watched him, concern etched on her face. "Baby, you look like you're carrying the whole world," she said gently. Marcus sighed, leaning on the handle. "Feels like it." She nodded slowly. "My daddy used to say, when they push you to the edge, you got 2 choices, fall or fight. But if you're going to fight, you better learn their game better than they know it." Her words hit Marcus like a jolt. Their game was the law. Maybe he couldn't afford a lawyer, but nobody could stop him from learning the rules himself. That night, Marcus cleared the kitchen table again, spreading out every document he had. He borrowed thick law books from the library, printed foreclosure guidelines from the state website, and started highlighting, cross-referencing, scribbling notes in the margins. Sleep faded into the background. Every free moment was spent buried in statutes and case law, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer stubbornness. Days blurred together until finally he found something. A single line in the foreclosure statute. All mortgage transfers had to be accompanied by a valid endorsement from the previous lender. It was technical, subtle, but powerful. Marcus dug through the bank's filings and froze. The final transfer of his mother's mortgage didn't have the required endorsement. Legally, the bank might have no right to foreclose. Heart-pounding, Marcus drafted a new motion, this time demanding full discovery of every document tied to the mortgage. He knew it was a gamble. The judge could toss it without a second glance. But if the court approved it, the bank would have to show its hand. 2 days later, the ruling arrived. Motion for discovery granted. Marcus sat on the couch, the paper shaking in his hands. He'd forced the system to acknowledge him. Relief washed over him, but it came with a darker realization. The bank wouldn't just accept this. They would hit back, hard. The very next morning, his bank account was suddenly locked, pending fraud investigation. His auto pay bills bounced. By evening, the power company cut his electricity. When he called the bank, they brushed it off as a technical issue. But Derek's smug tone made the truth obvious. That night, Jade arrived, eyes wide with worry. "Your car's gone," she blurted. "What?" Marcus rushed outside. The aging sedan that had always been parked at the curb was missing. "Repossession," a neighbor called. "Tow truck grabbed it an hour ago. Looked legit." Marcus's chest tightened. It wasn't just about the house anymore. They were stripping away everything he relied on, one piece at a time, trying to break him. He stood in the dark street, fists clenched so tight they ached, his heart pounding in his ears. They'd misjudged him. He wasn't just fighting for a deed anymore. He was fighting for every person who'd ever been crushed by a rigged system. Was Marcus pushing too far, risking everything for a battle he couldn't win? Or was this the moment that would redefine his whole life? Drop comment number 1 if you believe Marcus is right to keep fighting, even with the odds stacked against him. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if you stand for justice. But here's the real question. If the system itself is corrupt, how far will Marcus have to go to uncover the truth? And will he survive the war he's starting? Marcus sat in his DM kitchen, the fridge's low hum the only sound in the powerless house. His utilities were off, his savings frozen, his car gone. The court's discovery order felt less like a lifeline and more like a weapon he still wasn't sure how to wield. But he knew one thing. He had to use it right. The next morning, Marcus walked into the courthouse again. Stepped slow but deliberate. He handed over his official discovery request, listing every document he wanted. The original mortgage, all transfer records, and the notarized second mortgage papers. The clerk, a younger black woman named Tiana, glanced at the paperwork and offered him a tired, knowing smile. "Fighting the bank?" she asked quietly. "Every damn day," Marcus muttered. "Well," she said, stamping the request, "most folks give up before they get this far. Good luck." Marcus thought, this isn't luck. It's survival. 3 days later, the bank answered. Not with documents, but with a motion to dismiss discovery altogether, calling his request overly broad and unduly burdensome. Marcus read the filing twice, anger building with every dismissive phrase. They weren't even pretending to play fair. Without hesitation, he drafted a counter motion, citing specific case law he dug up during his sleepless nights. He marched it back to the courthouse himself, earning another approving nod from Tiana as she took the papers. That afternoon, his phone rang. Judge Crowell's chambers. The judge wanted an in-person hearing to discuss whether Marcus's discovery request was excessive. Marcus knew exactly what that meant. The judge was giving the bank a stage to try and crush him in public. 2 days later, Marcus stood before the bench, facing off against Brandon Locke for the first time. Brandon looked exactly as Marcus imagined. Perfect suit, slicked back hair, and a smile that dripped contempt. "Your Honor," Brandon began smoothly, "this is nothing more than a fishing expedition. Mr. Red is grasping at straws, trying to delay an inevitable foreclosure." Judge Crowell leaned back lazily. "Mr. Red," he drawled, "why should I force this bank to jump through hoops for you?" Marcus stepped forward, holding up copies of the mortgage documents. One original, one with the mysterious second mortgage. "Because, Your Honor," Marcus said, voice steady, "the bank filed 2 versions of the same document. Look at the signatures. My mother's name is consistent everywhere else, but here it's completely different." Crowell glanced briefly, unimpressed. "Signatures change over time." "Not in 3 months," Marcus shot back. "And not when the second signature supposedly happened the day after my mother was admitted to the hospital for a stroke." That got Crowell's attention. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Are you saying the bank submitted falsified documents?" "I'm saying," Marcus replied, "that without full discovery, we can't know. If they've got nothing to hide, they should have no problem turning over the originals." Brandon's smile slipped. "This is absurd, Your Honor. The foreclosure followed standard procedure." Crowell sighed, rubbing his temple. He clearly hated being cornered into looking impartial. "Fine," he grumbled. "The discovery request stands. The bank has 7 days to produce the documents." Marcus's heart hammered as the gavel fell. It wasn't victory, but it was a step. Outside, his phone buzzed. "Did you win?" Jade asked anxiously. "Not exactly," Marcus said, staring back at the courthouse doors. "But they have to hand over the paperwork now." She hesitated. "And if they don't?" "Then," Marcus said quietly, "we'll know the fraud runs deeper than I thought." But he didn't get all 7 days. 3 days later, he came home from his night shift at the community center to find 2 movers hauling his mother's old couch out the front door. "What are you doing?" he shouted, racing up the cracked steps. A sheriff's deputy stood by the curb, a bulky white man in mirrored sunglasses. He barely glanced Marcus's way. "Eviction order. Effective immediately," he drawled. Marcus's stomach dropped. "The court granted a stay," he protested. "Not anymore." The deputy held up a fresh order signed by Judge Kroll. "A bank filed new evidence this morning. Foreclosures final." Marcus snatched the papers. The new evidence was a revised mortgage transfer with a neatly notarized signature, almost certainly forged, but polished enough to fool anyone not looking hard. He turned back to the movers. "Stop! That couch belonged to my grandmother." "Not your house anymore, buddy," one of them muttered, dropping it on the lawn with a loud thud. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some sympathetic, some looking almost satisfied. One man across the street chuckled, arms folded. "Should have known you wouldn't keep a place like this," he called. Marcus stood there, stunned, as decades of family memories were tossed on the curb. By nightfall, the house stood hollow and dark. Marcus sat on the front steps, lit only by the weak glow of the street lamp. His phone buzzed again. "Jade." "Where are you?" she asked, voice tight. "Home," Marcus said bitterly. "Or what's left of it." "Come stay with me," she pleaded. You can't sleep outside." But Marcus didn't move. He stared at the empty doorway, the house suddenly lifeless. This wasn't just about losing a home anymore. This was war. They'd forged documents, weaponized the courts, weaponized the sheriff's office, and gotten away with it. Until now. Marcus rose slowly, determination stiffening his shoulders. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one. He wasn't just fighting for his mother's house anymore. He was fighting for justice. For her name, for everyone this system had steamrolled. Because if they could do this to him, they could do it to anybody, and he refused to let that stand. Marcus slept on the curb that night, the cold seeping through his thin jacket. What little he owned sat scattered across the grass, easy pickings for anyone bold enough to grab something. By morning, a few bags were already gone. The eviction crew had been efficient, almost robotic, turning his life into curbside clutter. His phone buzzed again, Jade's name on the screen. He let it ring. What was he supposed to say? Instead, he stood up slowly, muscles aching. They might have stripped him down to almost nothing, but he still had his resolve. The next morning, Marcus walked right back into the courthouse, head high despite hollow eyes. He filed an emergency motion contesting the eviction, attaching copies of the suspicious new documents the bank had pushed through. The clerk glanced at him with pity, stamping the motion. "Back again," she said softly. "You really think you can win this?" Marcus's jaw clenched. "I don't think," he said quietly. "I know." But the system wasn't done punishing him. That afternoon, as he left the courthouse, a patrol car rolled slowly beside him. The officer inside, a pale man with a buzz cut and mirrored shades, rolled down his window. "Marcus Red?" he drawled. Marcus's pulse spiked. "Yeah?" "Got a report about someone matching your description loitering around private property." The officer nodded toward the courthouse. "Mind explaining why you're hanging around?" Marcus stared at him. "I'm filing legal documents. That's what courthouses are for." The cop smirked. "Just making sure you're not causing trouble. You know how it is." Marcus said nothing. He knew exactly how it was. That evening, back in the community center break room, he sat with a chipped mug of bitter coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Mrs. Harmon shuffled in, eyes full of concern. "Baby, you look like you've been wrestling with the whole world," she said, easing into a chair. Marcus managed a tired half-smile. "Feels about right." "Don't you let them beat you down," she insisted. "You've got more fight in you than they ever counted on." Her words lingered with him as he walked to the cheap motel room he'd scraped enough cash to rent. For the moment, it was all he had. That fragile sense of security didn't last. 2 days later, sitting in a diner going over court filings, his phone lit up with an alert. "Your account has been frozen due to suspicious activity." His stomach dropped. Without access to his money, he couldn't pay the motel, buy food, or even afford bus fare. He called the bank's fraud line, jaw clenched. The smug voice on the other end belonged to Derek. "Mr. Red," he drawled, sounding amused, "seems there's been unusual activity on your account. Standard procedure is to freeze it while we investigate." "What kind of unusual activity?" Marcus demanded. Derek chuckled. "Hard to say. Sometimes all that legal paperwork stirs up trouble." Marcus's hand trembled as he ended the call. They weren't stopping at his house. They were trying to erase his ability to live. That night, things got worse. As Marcus stepped out of the motel lobby, Two sheriff's deputies approached, hands resting on their holstered guns. "You Marcus Red?" one asked, eyes cold. "Yeah," Marcus answered carefully. "You're coming with us," the deputy said. "Got a report you were trespassing at a private residence." Marcus blinked. "Where?" "Your old place. Neighbor says you were snooping around." "I haven't been near that house since they kicked me out," Marcus snapped. "Tell it to the judge," the other deputy muttered as he cuffed Marcus before he could protest. Hours later, Marcus sat in a reeking holding cell, walls stained, air thick with sweat and disinfectant. No formal charges, just detained for questioning. The message was clear as steel bars. "Back off, or we'll make your life hell." When they finally released him just before dawn, his phone was dead, his wallet nearly empty, and the motel had already locked him out for non-payment. Homeless, broke, and exhausted, Marcus sat on a bench outside the station, head in his hands. But the fire inside him hadn't gone out. If anything, it burned hotter. They'd taken his home, his car, his job, his money, his bed, but they hadn't taken his mind. After sunrise, he was back at the public library, diving into foreclosure law again. That's when he saw it. Another crack in the bank's armor. The transfer history showed his mother's mortgage bouncing between 3 different entities. But that final transfer? Still missing the required endorsement from the previous holder. Without that endorsement, the bank might have no legal standing to foreclose at all. It was buried in jargon and paperwork, the kind of detail most people would never catch. Marcus filed another motion, challenging the bank's right to foreclose based on that missing endorsement. The next day, as he walked out of the courthouse after submitting the motion, Brandon waited on the steps, arms crossed. "Mr. Red," he said, voice dripping false admiration, "I have to say, your persistence is impressive, but you're wasting your time. We've already moved to dismiss your latest stunt." Marcus didn't flinch. "Funny thing about the law, Mr. Locke," he replied. "It doesn't care how many $1,000 suits you own. If you don't have standing, you don't have a case." For the first time, Brandon's smile faltered. Marcus saw it, the tiniest crack. His fight was landing blows. But the bank was far from finished. That evening, Marcus arrived at the community center to find the director, Tim Barnes, waiting at the door, arms folded. "Marcus," Tim began, eyes avoiding his. "I hate this, but I have to let you go." Marcus stared. "Why?" Tim sighed. "We've had complaints. People saying you're attracting the wrong kind of attention. Donors are nervous. I can't risk losing funding." Marcus's breath stuttered. They weren't just going after him. They were cutting off every possible way he might survive. His job, his money, his home, piece by piece, they were trying to make him disappear. That night, he slipped back into the motel through the side door, knowing he couldn't pay another night. He collapsed onto the thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how much longer he could keep this up. Was this a righteous fight, or was he slamming his body against a wall that wasn't going to budge? Comment number 1. If you still think Marcus should keep swinging, no matter the cost, like, subscribe, and share if you believe the system has to answer for what it does to people like him. But here's the hard question. When the system itself becomes the enemy, how far can one man go before it breaks him? Or he breaks it? The next morning, Marcus sat at the edge of the motel bed, dead phone in hand. His account was frozen, his job gone, and technically, he was homeless. Survival itself had become an act of rebellion. He hadn't eaten since a stale gas station sandwich the night before. Still, Anger and purpose burned hotter than hunger. He headed back to the library, burying himself in case law, foreclosure actions, civil rights suits, consumer protection statutes. He scribbled notes until his hand cramped, barely noticing the Latina woman watching from across the room. Eventually, she approached and dropped a thick folder on the table. "You're fighting Heritage first, aren't you?" she asked quietly. Marcus looked up, startled. She was in her mid-30s, sharp-eyed, her ID badge reading, "Laura Ortiz, paralegal." "Who's asking?" he said cautiously. "Someone who's sick of watching people get steamrolled," Laura replied, sliding into the chair. "I used to work in their legal department. I watched them take homes from families who had no idea how to fight back. I couldn't stomach it anymore, so I left, but not before making copies of certain things." She nudged the folder toward him. Inside were internal memos, emails, and scanned documents stamped "confidential." They described how the bank prioritized foreclosures in predominantly black and brown neighborhoods. One memo read, "Priority processing for high-risk properties. Minimize litigation exposure by expediting evictions before challenges can be filed." "High risk," Marcus muttered. "That's corporate code for black-owned, isn't it?" Laura's jaw tightened. "Exactly. They targeted neighborhoods like yours because they assumed people wouldn't be able to fight." Marcus's stomach churned. He'd suspected race played a role, but seeing it laid out in cold corporate language made his blood boil. "Why give this to me?" he asked. "If the bank finds out—" "They already did," Laura cut in. "I lost my job because of it. But if you can use this to stop them from stealing your house, maybe it's worth something." Marcus nodded slowly. He didn't trust easily anymore, but the anger burning in her eyes felt real. "Thank you," he said, gripping the folder like a lifeline. "This changes everything." But victory never came without cost. 2 days later, Marcus walked up the library steps to find Laura waiting, face pale. "They fired me," she said, voice shaking. "Somebody figured out I accessed restricted files. They didn't say your name, but they know someone's challenging that foreclosure, and they're circling the wagons." Marcus's stomach knotted. "You need to lay low," he urged. "They'll come after you too." Laura hesitated, then nodded. "Just be careful, Marcus. They don't fight fair." That night, sitting in the corner of a 24-hour diner nursing burnt coffee, Marcus's phone rang from a blocked number. He answered warily. "Mr. Red," a smooth male voice said, "this is Brandon Locke, counsel for Heritage First Bank. I'd like to offer you an opportunity to resolve this—" "Quietly!" Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. "By quietly, you mean? I surrender my mother's house and pretend this never happened." "Exactly," Brandon replied, almost cheerful. "In return, we'll unfreeze your accounts, repair your credit, and provide a modest relocation stipend. You can start over, Mr. Red. Walk away while you still can." Marcus stared at the chipped table. "And if I don't?" Brandon's politeness vanished. "Then we bury you. Your case will drown in procedural motions until you can't afford to keep going. You'll lose the house, your prospects, and when you finally crawl away, broke and broken, you'll wish you'd taken the deal." Then he hung up. Marcus sat there, heart pounding, rage filling the spaces where fear had been. They weren't even pretending anymore. Intimidation was their language of choice. The next morning, Marcus filed another motion, this time demanding a full audit of the mortgage transfers under the state's anti-predatory lending statute. He knew it was a long shot, but it was another lever to pull. As he left the courthouse, his phone buzzed. "Jade again. You need to stop," she said, voice tight and scared. "I saw two men outside my building last night, just standing there watching the door. I called the cops. They shrugged it off. This fight, it's not just about you anymore. It's touching everyone around you." Marcus's throat closed. He'd expected retaliation, but not like this. "I can't stop," he said softly. "If they win, it's not just my house. It's every family they've robbed because they assumed no one would fight." Silence stretched. Finally, Jade exhaled shakily. "Then at least be smart," she said, "because they're playing for keeps." That night, back in his dim motel room, neon light flickering through the thin curtains, Marcus spread Laura's folder across the bed again. The memos, the forged-looking signatures, the eviction timelines. It was damning, but evidence alone wouldn't win. He needed a person, a voice the bank couldn't easily discredit. Then it hit him. The notary. The second mortgage carried a notary seal. If the notary hadn't actually witnessed his mother sign, the document would be fraudulent, perjury, criminal territory. Marcus dove into the state's online notary database until he found her. Denise Farrow, licensed notary, last listed address, 2 towns over. If he could get her to talk, he might finally have the leverage to crack this wide open, though he knew the risk for both of them. The next morning, Marcus borrowed a friend's beat-up car and drove out of town, nerves stretched tight. Denise's place was a modest one-story home with peeling paint and a faded "Beware of Dog" sign hanging crooked on the gate. He knocked twice, heart racing. The door opened a crack, and a middle-aged black woman with tired eyes looked out. "Miss Farrow?" he asked, holding up a copy of the notarized document. "I need to talk to you about this signature." Her gaze flicked to the paper, and her face went pale. "I can't help you," she murmured, starting to shut the door. Marcus stepped forward, stopping it with his foot. "Please," he said, voice low but urgent. "This isn't just about me. They're stealing homes, using signatures like this. Families are losing everything. If you know this wasn't signed in front of you, you know it's wrong, and you know they'll keep doing it unless someone finally stands up." Time was slipping away, and Marcus was running out of both. As he stepped out of the courthouse, his phone buzzed. It was Denise Farrow. "They froze my accounts," she blurted, panic threading her voice. "My paycheck's locked. My landlord's already threatening eviction." Marcus cursed quietly. "Stay calm. They're trying to scare us." "It's working," she snapped. "I'm losing everything for helping you." Before he could answer, another call flashed across his screen. Unknown number. He hesitated, then picked up. "Mr. Red," came Brandon Locke's smooth, patronizing voice. "Looks like you've stirred up quite a mess. I warned you." Marcus's grip tightened. "Freezing accounts, harassing witnesses, that's witness tampering," Brandon chuckled. "Big talk for a guy in a cheap motel. This isn't law anymore, it's survival. Walk away. Maybe we stop squeezing." Marcus ended the call, fury boiling beneath his skin. The bank wasn't just fighting his lawsuit, they were dismantling his life, brick by brick. When he got back to the motel, the front desk clerk was waiting, arms folded. "Mr. Red, your card declined. You're 2 nights behind. I need full payment by tomorrow morning, or you're out." Marcus didn't argue. With frozen accounts, what was there to say? He packed his few belongings into his battered backpack and slipped out quietly. That night he slept in the back seat of a borrowed car, parked in a dim corner of the community center lot. The irony wasn't lost on him. fighting like hell to save a house while sleeping in a cramped, freezing car, trying to convince himself this wasn't the end. The next morning, hunger gnawed at his stomach as he trudged toward the library. He bought a cheap coffee with the last crumpled dollar in his pocket and claimed a corner table. He spread out his legal notes, flipping through pages he'd highlighted and annotated until they were practically falling apart. His phone buzzed again. A text from Laura Ortiz. "Call me. Found something." Marcus dialed instantly. Laura picked up on the first ring, her voice low and urgent. "I got into Heritage First's internal system one last time before they cut my credentials," she said. "There's an email thread, Locke and Kane, talking about speeding up your eviction by filing revised documents without proper procedure. They knew the judge wouldn't look carefully." Marcus's breath hitched. "Do you have them?" "Screenshots," Laura replied. "But if I send them, I'm done. Blacklisted from every major firm around." Marcus swallowed. "I understand. But this isn't just about me anymore." A long sigh crackled through the line. "I know," she muttered. "I'll send them. But be careful. These people don't play soft." Minutes later, screenshots appeared, emails between Locke, Kane, and even Judge Crowell's assistant, openly discussing bypassing protocol. It was naked corruption, the kind that could blow everything wide open. But before Marcus could get the new evidence filed, the bank struck again. That afternoon, while he was printing the emails at a copy shop, his phone rang. "Jade." "Marcus," she whispered, voice shaking. "Two guys in suits came to my job. They asked my manager if I was tied to illegal activity. He said if any more heat comes, I'm fired." Marcus closed his eyes, the weight of it all crashing down. They weren't just targeting him. They were going after everyone connected to him. Laura, Denise, Jade. Heritage. First wasn't just trying to win. They were trying to crush, to erase. By the time Marcus reached the motel that evening, the lock on his room had been changed. The manager stood there, arms folded. "No payment, no room," he said flatly. Marcus didn't bother arguing. He slung his backpack over his shoulder and walked away, shoulders heavy with exhaustion and rage. He was broke, unhoused, and his evidence might as well be worthless if he couldn't stay afloat long enough to use it. That night, he huddled in a plastic chair inside a 24-hour laundromat, nodding off to the rhythm of spinning dryers and humming machines. When the sun finally crept over the horizon, Marcus headed straight to the courthouse, determined to file the new evidence no matter what roadblocks they threw at him. At the clerk's window, the same tired woman from before shook her head. "Judge Crowell's calendar is full," she said. "No new motions until next month." "Next month," Marcus snapped. "They'll sell the house by then." She shrugged. "I don't make the rules." Marcus stumbled out of the courthouse, heartbeat thudding in his ears. Every door had been slammed, every escape route blocked, every lifeline severed. For the first time since this war began, he felt truly beaten. That night, he sat in the borrowed car under a flickering street lamp, staring across town towards the courthouse. He'd poured everything into this fight. Time, money, sanity. And the system had chewed him up, spit him out. Was this really the end? Broken, homeless, forgotten. As he sat there hollow and exhausted, he thought of his mother, of Evelyn's calloused hands after double shifts, of her weary smile the day she burned the last mortgage bill. She'd spent her life fighting a system that never played fair, and she'd never back down. Neither would he. He owed her that much. Hands shaking, Marcus opened his laptop, catching the diner's free Wi-Fi from across the street. He drafted a motion for an emergency hearing, citing newly uncovered fraud and possible judicial misconduct. He attached Laura's screenshots, Denise's sworn affidavit, and a detailed timeline of every retaliatory stunt the bank had pulled. Then he filed it electronically and sent copies to every local news outlet he could find. Marcus didn't sleep. He stayed in the car, watching the courthouse windows go dark one by one, waiting for whatever counterpunch would come. The next morning, cold and stiff, he woke to his phone buzzing on the passenger seat. New email. His heart pounded as he opened it. Emergency motion hearing. Scheduled for Friday, 10:20 a.m. Relief swept through him, sharp and sudden. But he knew it wouldn't last. Friday was only 2 days away. Heritage First wouldn't sit quietly and accept this development. Evidence alone wouldn't be enough now. Marcus needed allies. That afternoon, he walked into the offices of the Justice Alliance, a small civil rights nonprofit known for confronting systemic abuse. The receptionist, a young black woman with box braids and a wary gaze, glanced at his beat-up backpack before asking, "Got an appointment?" "No," Marcus admitted, setting Laura's folder and the emergency motion on the counter. "But I've got proof a bank is committing fraud, harassing witnesses, and using the courts to steal homes. If nobody steps in, they'll walk." The receptionist hesitated, eyes flicking in over the documents. Finally, she sighed, picked up the phone and said, "Wait here." 15 minutes later, Marcus sat across from attorney Trevor Boyd. Boyd, a tall black man in his early 50s, gray threading his hair, looked like someone who'd spent decades fighting losing battles and still kept showing up. He flipped through the documents silently, his expression growing darker. "Damn," he muttered, holding up the email chain between lock and cane. "They barely even tried to hide it. This is classic foreclosure fraud. And Crowell's involvement?" He shook his head. "If this blows, it'll rock everything." "So you'll help?" Marcus asked, barely breathing. Boyd nodded. "We'll file an amicus brief backing your motion and start prepping for Friday. But understand, this stopped being just a foreclosure case a long time ago. If we push, we're exposing a whole web. The bank, the judge, maybe further. They'll come for you harder than ever." Marcus's jaw tightened. "They already took everything. I've got nothing left to lose." Boyd studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. "All right, Marcus, let's make some noise." The next 48 hours blurred. Boyd's team worked late drafting filings, reaching out to reporters and alerting community groups. Marcus ran on adrenaline and cheap coffee, barely resting. Every time his phone buzzed, he braced for another blow. Frozen funds, some trumped-up charge, maybe even an arrest. But nothing came. The silence felt wrong, like the calm before a hurricane. The bank wasn't done. They were regrouping. Friday dawned gray and bitter. Marcus stood outside the courthouse, clutching the frayed manila folder that had become his shield. Jade arrived first, face lined with worry, but eyes burning with determination. "You ready?" she asked softly. "Ready as I'll ever be," he replied, squeezing her hand like an anchor. Moments later, Denise Farrow hurried up the steps, glancing over her shoulder as though expecting someone to snatch her away. "I'm here," she said, slightly breathless. "I'll testify. But if they come for me—" "We've got reporters inside," Boyd cut in, stepping beside Marcus. "This hearing's public record now. They can't bury this in the dark." Together they walked through the heavy doors into a packed courtroom buzzing with tension. Reporters filled the benches, phones ready, cameras already rolling despite half-hearted warnings from security. Marcus spotted Laura near the back, offering a small, tired nod. At the plaintiff's table, Brandon Locke sat rigid, arrogance replaced with cold calculation. Behind him, regional manager Derek Kane leaned in, whispering hurriedly. Heritage, first, had brought backup. Marcus had Boyd, 2 terrified witnesses, and the truth. It would have to be enough. Judge Ernest Crowell strutted in, irritation etched across his face as he took in the crowd. He banged his gavel harder than necessary. This is an emergency hearing regarding the foreclosure of 1628 Pine Street, he announced. Mr. Red, you may proceed. Marcus rose, pulse roaring in his ears. He looked at Jade in the gallery, her fingers knotted together, then drew a deep breath and stepped towards the bench. Your Honor, Marcus began, voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. Attorney Locke is correct about one thing. The law matters. That's exactly why we're here. Heritage First didn't just bend the law. They smashed it. He held up 2 sets of papers. These are 2 versions of my mother's mortgage. The original from 2015 and a doctored version from 2021 used to justify foreclosure. He approached the bench. Look at the signatures. The 2015 signature matches my mother's handwriting on every other legal document. The 2021 one? He shook his head. Shaky. Wrong. She couldn't have signed it. She was hospitalized from a stroke the very day they claim she did. And the notary who supposedly witnessed it, Ms. Denise Farrow, is here to testify she never saw my mother sign anything. Denise took the stand, visibly nervous but holding firm. Under Boyd's patient questioning, she explained how a bank representative brought her the unsigned document, claiming the client was too sick to come in, and they just needed the stamp. So you notarized without seeing the signature made? Boyd asked. Denise swallowed. Yes, I trusted them. I didn't realize it was fraudulent until Mr. Red showed me the foreclosure paperwork. Brandon sprang up. Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay and irrelevant. This doesn't negate the underlying debt. Crowell lifted a hand, eyes narrowing. Overruled. If the mortgage is falsified, the foreclosure may be void. Continue. Boyd nodded and handed another record to the judge. Your Honor, this is the chain of mortgage transfers. Each transfer requires a valid endorsement from the prior lender. Note the final transfer to Heritage First. Crowell scanned the page, his brow creasing. Now compare the earlier transfers to the final one, Boyd continued. Every previous transfer includes an endorsement. The last one, the one giving Heritage First supposed ownership, he tapped the page. No endorsement, no signature, no legal standing to foreclose. Heritage First never properly held this loan. The courtroom buzzed. Even the reporters leaned forward, fingers flying over screens. Brandon's jaw clenched. He bent toward Kane, who was frantically typing on his phone. Something inside their strategy was unraveling. Crowell looked up, irritation warring with unease. Mr. Locke, he said, does the bank have an explanation for the missing endorsement? Brandon rose, smoothing his tie. Electronic transfers are common, Your Honor. Physical endorsements can be delayed. It doesn't change the validity of the debt itself. Boyd pounced. Maybe not the debt, but it absolutely affects the bank's right to foreclose. Without a valid transfer, Heritage First had no legal standing. They pushed a family out of their home on documents they didn't have the legal authority to enforce. The crowd murmured louder. Crowell rubbed his temple, clearly annoyed at being cornered on the record. Can the bank produce the original, fully endorsed documents? A faint hesitation. We'll require additional time to retrieve those, Your Honor, Brandon said. Boyd shook his head. They've had months. If the documents existed, they'd have shown them by now. They're stalling because they can't produce what doesn't exist. The room fell silent. Crowell's eyes moved between Marcus, Boyd, and Brandon, then drifted toward the reporters, who were already typing headlines in real time. The judge, who'd once chuckled at the idea of Marcus defending himself, now looked tired, boxed in. This court will recess for 20 minutes, Crowell finally declared, banging the gavel. We'll reconvene shortly. As everyone shuffled out, Marcus turned to Boyd. He's stalling, Marcus murmured. Boyd nodded grimly. Locke's on the phone with someone important right now, trying to decide if they bury this or buy you off. Near the back, Jade hurried over. You're winning, she whispered, gripping Marcus's arm. They look scared. Scared people are dangerous, Marcus replied quietly. They've got too much to lose. 20 minutes stretched into 30, then 40. When the court finally reconvened, Crowell's expression had hardened. Mr. Locke, he said coolly, does the bank have the requested documentation? Brandon stood, his voice less assured. We've encountered unforeseen delays, Your Honor, he said carefully. However, we maintain that the foreclosure was lawful and ask the court to dismiss Mr. Red's claims as meritless distraction. Crowell's jaw flexed. He glanced at the reporters lining the back, then at Marcus, standing resolute despite everything. This court finds ample reason to question the legitimacy of this foreclosure, Crowell announced at last, gavel striking. The stay of foreclosure remains. Heritage First is ordered to produce all original endorsed mortgage documents within 7 days for review. Failure to comply will result in dismissal of the foreclosure claim. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Marcus exhaled shakily, his hands trembling. It wasn't full victory, but it was more ground than anyone had expected him to win, including the judge who just granted it. As people filed out, Brandon brushed past Marcus, eyes cold. You think you're clever, Red, he hissed. You've made enemies you can't even imagine. Marcus didn't flinch. So have you. Outside, Boyd clapped Marcus on the shoulder. You bought yourself time, he said. Now we make sure they can't wriggle out. But Marcus knew this wasn't over. A wounded predator was still a predator, maybe more dangerous than ever. He'd exposed their lies, but the real war was only beginning. The next strike came fast. 2 days later, an email from the court hit his inbox. Plaintiff has filed emergency motion to dismiss defendant's claims for lack of merit. Attached was a dense brief from Locke, insisting Marcus's fraud allegations were baseless, calling the missing endorsement a minor clerical oversight, urging the judge to let the foreclosure move ahead. Marcus's heart pounded as he scrolled. This wasn't defense, it was counterattack. They wanted his claims dead before they ever had to turn over anything. He called Boyd immediately. They're trying to cut you off at the knees, Boyd said, irritation in his voice. If Crowell grants this, the foreclosure stands, and the documents vanish. We've got to hit back, hard and fast. Within hours, Boyd's team filed a blistering counter motion, arguing the bank's refusal to produce originals was itself evidence of fraud. They attached Denise's affidavit, the email thread between Locke and Kane, and Laura's internal memos outlining the bank's rush tactics in predominantly black neighborhoods. Under growing media pressure, the court set an expedited hearing for Monday. But Heritage First still had other weapons to use. Late Friday night, Marcus was walking back toward the motel after another long stretch at the library when a black SUV eased to a stop nearby. Two men in dark suits stepped out, faces expressionless. "Mr. Red?" one asked, flashing what looked like a private investigator's badge. Marcus froze. "Who's asking?" "We need to ask you some questions about potential fraud in your filings against Heritage First." Marcus's pulse spiked. "Fraud? From WHO?" The second man gave a thin smile. "That's confidential. Come with us voluntarily, or we can bring law enforcement into this." Every instinct screamed at Marcus to run, but he stood his ground. "You got a warrant? Court order? Anything?" The first man frowned. "Don't make this difficult." Marcus lifted his phone. "Touch me, and this goes straight to the Justice Alliance and the press." "You really want that kind of attention?" he added. The men exchanged a look, calculation flickering under their cool exterior. After a tense pause, they turned back to the SUV without another word and drove off. Message received. "We can reach you anytime." Shaken, Marcus called Boyd. "They're escalating," Boyd said darkly. "They want you scared enough to fold. That means you're hurting them. Stay low. Stay smart." The weekend crawled by in a haze of anxiety and preparation. Marcus barely slept, rehearsing arguments until every word etched into his brain. Sunday night, he met with Denise and Laura at Boyd's office to walk through their testimony. Laura looked drained, eyes ringed with fatigue. "If they lose, it's not just your place on the line," she said quietly. "This blows up their whole model. They'll fight like cornered animals." Marcus nodded, resolve hardening. "Let them. I'm still here." Monday morning broke crisp and clear. Marcus arrived early, Boyd at his side. Jade waited on the courthouse steps, pressing a steaming cup of coffee into his hand. "You've got this," she murmured. "Whatever happens, you've already done more than anybody thought possible." "Not enough," Marcus replied softly. "Not until that house is safe for good." Inside, the tension was thicker than before. Brandon sat at the plaintiff's table, mask of cool control back in place, but his eyes darted toward the gallery where several reporters were seated. Behind him, Kane looked sickly, fingers tapping nervously. Judge Crowell entered, gavel cracking. "We are here to address the plaintiff's motion to dismiss and the defendant's counter-motion," he announced. "Mr. Locke, proceed." Brandon rose, voice polished. "Your Honor, this case has gone on long enough. Mr. Red has produced no solid proof of fraud. Heritage first followed standard procedures. Any minor documentation discrepancies are clerical, not criminal. The foreclosure should stand." Crowell's face remained unreadable. "Mr. Boyd?" he asked. Boyd stood, calm and deliberate, the room leaning in as if the air itself were waiting. "Your Honor," Boyd said, "if this were a clerical issue, the bank would have produced the original endorsed documents by now. They haven't, because they can't. We have sworn testimony from the notary who supposedly witnessed the mortgage modification, confirming she never saw Ms. Red sign anything. That's not a typo. That's fraud." Crowell turned to Denise. "Miss Farrow, do you stand by your affidavit?" Denise straightened. "Yes, Your Honor. I was misled by a bank representative. I stamped a document without witnessing the signature. I regret it, but it happened." Brandon jumped up. "The bank was unaware of any notary irregularities," he protested. "This is a desperate attempt to discredit normal foreclosure practices." Marcus rose beside Boyd. "Desperate is the bank's attempt to cover its tracks. The missing endorsement proves they never legally had the loan. He carried a thick folder to the bench. These are foreclosure cases from the past 5 years, all in neighborhoods like mine. Same bank, same rush procedures, same suspicious paperwork. This isn't just about my house. It's a pattern, a system. The gallery buzzed with murmurs. Phones flew up as reporters typed. Crowell's jaw tightened as he turned back to Brandon. Can the bank produce the original documents with proper endorsements? Brandon hesitated. We are still compiling our records, Your Honor. Enough, Crowell snapped, slamming his gavel. The bank has had more than enough time. This court denies the plaintiff's motion to dismiss and allows discovery to continue. Marcus's lungs finally released, but Crowell wasn't finished. However, Mr. Red, you now bear the burden of proving intentional fraud. You have 10 days to present irrefutable evidence of malicious conduct. The gavel came down again. Court adjourned! Marcus stood frozen as people filed out. He'd dodged dismissal, but now the bar had shifted impossibly high. 10 days to prove intent or lose everything. Boyd clapped a hand on his shoulder. We bought time, he said quietly, but Crowell's covering himself. He's giving Heritage First one last chance to slither away. Now we find what nails them to the wall. Marcus nodded, jaw set. He knew the bank would double down, flood them with useless paperwork, harass witnesses harder, maybe fabricate new records. But he'd come too far to stop. 10 days. That was all he had to expose, not just mistakes, but a deliberate scheme. The trap had snapped shut. But this time, Marcus realized, he wasn't the one caught inside. Heritage First was. Now, he just needed the key to lock it. The days that followed were brutal. Heritage First buried Boyd's office in document dumps and legal noise. They floated counterclaims of defamation, hinted at sanctions, and leaned harder on anyone helping Marcus. Denise received another anonymous voicemail hissing that accidents happen to people who talk too much. Laura found herself mysteriously passed over for every interview. Her resume suddenly radioactive. It was precisely what Marcus expected, but he still had one card left. The night before the deadline, he sat in Boyd's office staring at a paused video on a laptop screen, grainy security footage from a Heritage First conference room 3 months earlier. On it, Derek Kane sat with several executives, audio slightly muffled but clear enough. The words Marcus had replayed a dozen times still chilled him. If we stall processing just long enough, Kane's voice said, by the time anyone notices the signatures don't match, it won't matter. Courts side with us 99% of the time. We just keep pushing. A former IT employee, disgusted by what they'd seen, had slipped the footage to Laura, who passed it to Boyd. It was exactly what Crowell had demanded, proof of intent. The next morning, Marcus walked into court with something he hadn't felt in weeks: momentum. Boyd walked beside him, a crooked grin tugging his mouth. Locke's going to lose it when he sees this, he murmured. The courtroom was more crowded than ever. Reporters, activists, even curious court staff packed the benches. At the plaintiff's table, Brandon and Kane sat stiff, wariness replacing arrogance. They smelled the danger. Judge Crowell entered, jaw set, gavel echoing. Mr. Red, this is your final opportunity to present evidence of malicious intent, he said. Proceed. Marcus stood, holding up a small flash drive. Your Honor, this contains video from an internal Heritage First meeting where senior staff discuss deliberately pushing through questionable foreclosures before homeowners can challenge them. They knew signatures didn't match and planned to rely on courts looking the other way. Brandon jumped up. Objection! This footage was obtained illegally and should be inadmissible. Boyd stepped forward. The whistleblower who provided it has sworn an affidavit, Your Honor. The video is authentic heritage. First can't hide behind privacy while conspiring to defraud homeowners. Crowell sighed, massaging his temple. Play the footage, he ordered. The room fell silent as the screen flickered to life, every eye glued to the grainy image. Kane's voice echoed through the speakers. If we delay processing just enough, by the time anyone realizes the signatures don't match, it won't matter. The court will side with us. We just keep pushing. The words hung heavy. The gallery erupted in shocked whispers. Reporters typed furiously. Kane's face turned ashen. Brandon's composure cracked, hands clenching. Crowell stared, disgust flickering across his features. Mr. Locke, the judge said slowly, does your client have any explanation for this? Brandon swallowed. Your Honor, those remarks are taken out of context. The context is crystal clear, Boyd cut in. Heritage first knowingly advanced fraudulent foreclosures, assuming courts would rubber stamp them. This isn't a glitch. It's a business model. Crowell exhaled, fingers drumming the bench. When he looked at Marcus, there was something new in his eyes. Respect. This court finds sufficient evidence of malicious foreclosure fraud, Crowell declared, voice firm. The foreclosure on Mr. Red's home is hereby nullified. For a heartbeat, Marcus couldn't move. Then relief washed over him so hard his knees almost buckled. He closed his eyes just for a second, letting the words settle. He'd done it. Against every odd, he'd actually won. But Crowell wasn't finished. This court also orders an independent investigation into Heritage First Bank's foreclosure practices, the judge continued. Furthermore, this matter is referred to the State Bar for review of Attorney Locke's conduct. Brandon's face twisted in shock. Kane looked like he might throw up. The gavel cracked down. Court adjourned! The room exploded into noise. Reporters scrambling, people talking over one another, flashes popping. Boyd clapped Marcus on the back, grinning wide now. You didn't just win your case, he said. You blew the doors off theirs. Jade rushed to Marcus's side, grabbing his hand. You did it, she whispered, eyes shining. It's over. Marcus knew better. The foreclosure was dead, but Heritage First wasn't. People like Brandon didn't fade quietly. They regrouped, appealed, tried to rewrite the story. He'd won today. Tomorrow would be another battle. Outside, the winter sun hung low as Marcus stepped onto the courthouse steps, the crowd's buzz swirling around him. He half expected someone to shout that there'd been a mistake, that some last-minute motion had undone everything. Boyd checked his phone. It's official, he said. Orders filed. The house is legally yours again. Marcus exhaled, shoulders finally beginning to unknot. His mother's home. Saved. Near the bottom of the steps, Laura waited with a weary smile. She'd lost her job, her path in corporate law, scorched by her decision to expose the bank. Beside her stood Denise, arms folded tightly, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. The threats had slowed, but her livelihood hung in limbo. Marcus walked over. This isn't over, Laura said quietly. The bank will appeal. Crowell will protect himself. They'll fight the investigation. I know, Marcus replied, and I'm not done either. He glanced at the cameras still rolling, the reporters shouting questions. They wanted me to just walk away. But now I know how their game works. I'm not just fighting for me anymore. That evening, he stood outside the small house that had almost been stolen, the cracked sidewalk suddenly looking like sacred ground. The ugly red eviction notice was gone. In its place sat the original deed, newly stamped and recorded, his mother's name, untouched. Marcus traced the letters with his thumb, eyes stinging. Inside, the rooms were empty, but memory filled the space. The old couch, the worn kitchen table, the faded wallpaper peeling at corners, but stubbornly hanging on, just like him. The struggle had cost him nearly everything: his job, savings, sleep, sense of safety. But it had given him something else: purpose. He dragged a hidden pattern of corruption into the light, not just for himself, but for countless people who'd been steamrolled quietly, their stories never told. Families who never even knew the fight was rigged before it started. Now the world was finally paying attention. A knock pulled him from his thoughts. Boyd stood on the porch, holding a thick envelope. "Settlement offer," he said, handing it over. "Heritage. First wants to avoid a full-blown civil trial and deeper investigation." Marcus opened it, eyes widening at the six-figure sum. Enough to start over anywhere. But buried in the fine print, he saw it: a full release of claims and strict confidentiality. "If I sign this," Marcus said slowly, "the investigation dies." Boyd nodded. "They buy your silence. No more civil suit, no testimony, no public fight. No one would blame you for taking it. You've already won big." Marcus looked past him at the house his mother had bled for. Winning back the deed was personal. But shutting down the truth? That would betray everyone still trapped in the same nightmare. He handed the envelope back. "Tell them to keep their money. I'm not for sale." Boyd's grin came back wider. "Figured that'd be your answer," he said. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was fast and ugly. The video of Kane's admission went viral, picked up by national outlets. State investigators raided Heritage First's regional office, seizing computers and boxes of files. Kane resigned under personal reasons. Brandon was suspended pending ethics hearings. Even Judge Crowell found himself under investigation after another whistleblower exposed his quiet financial ties to the bank. But for Marcus, the biggest victory wasn't in headlines. One evening on his porch, sipping coffee from his mother's chipped mug, a woman approached with a teenage boy. "Mr. Red?" she asked nervously. "My sister." "Same bank, same forged documents. Because of your case, they dropped her foreclosure. She gets to keep her house." Marcus felt warmth spread through his chest. "That's why we fight," he said simply. As the sun dipped behind his reclaimed roofline, he knew the war against predatory systems was far from finished. Banks would adapt. New schemes would surface. But something had changed. People were watching now, questioning instead of blindly trusting. And Marcus wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a problem for them. Marcus Red's battle had started as a desperate attempt to save one modest house. It evolved into a confrontation with a machine designed to bleed the powerless dry. His story exposed an uncomfortable truth. Banks don't always play fair. Courts don't always protect the vulnerable. And systems often tilt toward those with money, access, and influence. But it also revealed something stronger: how resilience and knowledge can bend the odds. Heritage First counted on Marcus being uninformed, overwhelmed by jargon and procedure. Instead, he learned the rules they'd weaponized and turned those rules against them. He questioned every line, challenged every assumption, and dug until he found the cracks. What looked like a doomed foreclosure became a landmark win because one man refused to accept "that's just how it works" as an answer. His victory also showed the power of solidarity. Marcus didn't win alone. Laura risked her career. Denise risked her license and safety. Boyd and the Justice Alliance threw their weight against a giant. Whistleblowers, reporters, and neighbors amplified the truth. Corrupt systems thrive when people feel isolated and powerless. They stumble when people link arms, share information, and demand accountability, loudly, relentlessly together. And the last lesson: justice isn't automatic. It's fought for, inch by inch, often at a brutal personal cost. Marcus's story is a reminder that change starts with someone who refuses to back down, even when the odds look impossible. So what about you? Should he have taken the settlement and walked, or kept fighting? Comment 1 if you believe standing up to corruption is always worth it. Like, subscribe, and share this story if you think more people need to hear what one determined voice can do. The system may be rigged, but paper still tells the truth. If you are in your 60s or 70s, you probably grew up in a world where a handshake mattered and a promise meant something. But you also remember redlining, denied loans, and the quiet way certain families were always pushed to the edge of town. Marcus Red's story feels painfully familiar. A paid-off house suddenly in default. A bank manager speaking down to him like he didn't belong. A judge who chuckled at the idea of a working man defending himself. For many older Americans, especially Black and brown elders, the fear of losing a home you spent decades paying for is very real. The lesson Marcus teaches is simple but powerful. The game may be rigged, yet the paperwork still holds clues. He didn't just accept the bank's word. He checked signatures, dates, stamps, and transfer records. He caught the missing endorsement, the mismatched handwriting, the sloppy shortcuts the bank assumed no one would notice. At an age when some people are told to slow down, his story reminds seniors that paying attention to the fine print can be an act of self-defense, and sometimes the first step toward justice. You're never too small or too old to learn their rules. Marcus didn't have a law degree. He had a worn kitchen table, a public library card, and the stubbornness his mother taught him. Many of you know that feeling. You have sat at your own tables late at night, sorting medical bills, Social Security letters, or insurance forms that seem designed to confuse you. The world keeps moving to apps and passwords, while your security still feels tied to paper files and a landline phone. Marcus shows that you do not have to be a lawyer to use the law. He read cases until the words stopped sounding like a foreign language. He learned what standing meant, what a stay of eviction was, and how to file a motion even when the clerk rolled her eyes. He did what so many older Americans have done their whole lives. He taught himself what no one bothered to teach him, and he refused to be rushed or shamed out of asking questions. His story is a reminder that learning is not just for the young. Your experience, your patience, and your memory of how things used to be are tools. When someone tells you that's just how the system works, you have every right to answer, "Show me where it says that." One voice is powerful, but a chorus changes history. Anyone who has lived long enough knows that no one survives hard times alone. You remember neighbors who shared casseroles during layoffs, church members who passed the hat, when a family's lights were about to be shut off. Marcus started this battle alone, but he did not finish it that way. A tired notary found the courage to admit she'd stamped a document she never saw signed. A former bank paralegal risked her career to bring him proof of targeting in black neighborhoods. A civil rights lawyer and a small nonprofit stepped in when his case became bigger than one man and one house. Even the reporters and community members who filled that courtroom changed the air in the room. Suddenly, the judge knew the world was watching. Older Americans have seen this before, from the marches of the 1960s to town hall meetings after factories closed. Change came when ordinary people decided, we're going to stand together. Marcus's victory was not just the return of a small house. It was a statement to his grandchildren's generation that you can push back, and that your voice carries further when others are willing to stand beside you. For Marcus, every filing, every sleepless night in a borrowed car was a promise to his late mother that her sacrifice would not be thrown away, and that her little house would stand as proof that ordinary people can still win. For those of you in your 60s or beyond, the deepest lesson is this: even when the system feels cold and distant, your story, your courage, and your insistence on fairness still matter, and the next generation is watching how you respond when power goes too far. Friends, after walking with Marcus through frozen bank accounts, sleepless nights, and that final moment when the judge said the foreclosure was nullified, I'd love to hear from you. If a bank or big company tried to take something you worked your whole life for, a house, a pension, your savings, would you keep fighting like Marcus did? Or would you feel pressured to take the quiet settlement and move on? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tap like if this story spoke to you, and subscribe so you don't miss more real-life lessons on justice, courage, and dignity.